Ham wrote those lyrics. This remains a very recognizably UU hymn.
The imagery of water and movement still reflects our self-understanding
as a living, moving, and evolving tradition. The emphasis on kindred hearts and minds, bound together not by creed, but rather by a shared concern for seeking truth, promoting freedom, and serving human need.
We might expand that to planetary need, earth need. The call to be a prophetic church whose ministry,
rooted in the power of love, is liberating.
Even the air of smug
superiority, defining ourselves over and against those creedal faiths that bind the mind, is familiar.
Shed of the romanticization, our streams have
never been tranquil, and rosy optimism of a dawning future, which doesn't quite feel so trustworthy in this moment. This hymn still describes us pretty well, I'd say.
So it's good to sing it
Now and then to remind ourselves that despite all the change and the ever-expanding openness we aspire to, we are still a distinctive and unique tradition in our own right.
Because it can get pretty confusing, not only to
Outsiders, but even to us UUs when we try to describe ourselves.
Not only do we lack one
Shared central sacred story or canon, as John pointed out, but when we do share sacred stories or myths, we do so without the rituals that often give those sacred stories or myths their collective shaping power in communities.
as heirs to the radical side of the Protestant Reformation,
Those who define themselves most strongly against the Catholic Church and its high church Protestant cousins, we have a long history of reactivity and rebelliousness to anything that smacks of official religion with priestly roles and rituals, or even stained glass windows.
our Unitarian forebears in particular took the Protestant emphasis
On sola scriptura, the Bible alone,
even farther, rejecting the authority
and legitimacy of many aspects of the Christian tradition that aren't in the Bible, including, of course, the doctrine of the Trinity. And then later, during the Enlightenment, turning a critical eye even to the Bible itself, rejecting anything deemed objectionable to reason,
which was a lot for Unitarians like
Thomas
Thomas
Jefferson.
in his desire to purify Christianity of
Anything irrational, Jefferson created his own version of the Bible. Did you know that?
With a razor, he carefully
Excised all the
miracles and most mentions of the supernatural
from the Christian Testament. Then he
pasted what was left of the Gospels into a slim book he titled The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth,
commonly referred to today as the Jefferson Bible.
Among the sections Jefferson jettisoned
We're all
references to angels and prophecies.
we just had our
Christmas Eve service.
so imagine all references to angels and prophecies, all of the healing stories, the resurrection,
And all references to Jesus' divinity. What's left is Jefferson's Unitarian
version of a reasonable Christianity. The story of the life and teachings of Jesus, the man, whose deeds alone embody the supreme form of religion.
And I kind of doubt, although I don't know this, but I kind of doubt that Jefferson
Paid much attention to the fact that Jesus was Jewish.
in a letter to fellow Unitarian John Adams in 1813,
Jefferson likened his project to, quote, pulling diamonds from a dunghill to produce the most sublime and benevolent code of morals which has ever been offered to man.
I'm not sure if that's the kind of project James Parse had in mind
And when he proposed, as John said, that everyone should write their own gospel. I suspect not. He didn't write it himself, after all. From Carson's perspective, I imagine, Jefferson pretty much killed the myth, eliminating everything that points to mystery. Here is how Jefferson's Bible ends. Now, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre, wherein was never man yet laid. There laid they Jesus, and rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed. Nothing unresolved there. In later generations of Unitarians and Universalists, some stripped the Bible down even further, of course, questioning the historical validity of any of the stories and rejecting the entire book as a set of harmful, incorrect, and outdated myths. Some of you may agree with that. And that's fine, as long as you're able to remain in covenant with those of us who do find value in the Bible or other sacred scriptures. And since we have no creedal tests for membership, and we embrace an ever-growing pluralism, that includes those who believe Jesus was uniquely divine, was God incarnate on earth, come to bring good news to the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed, was crucified and resurrected. All too often you use, and I must tell you, people of color in our midst, often notice almost always white you use who do this, use Jefferson's version of the story as a creedal test, making it clear, directly or indirectly, that those who tell that story differently need not apply. Now, I'm not a Christian UU, but I often find myself defending Christianity in UU spaces, including this one, because as a non-Christian, it's safe for me to do so. So I agree with John. There is tremendous value in sacred stories, myths, and scriptures when we engage them with humility and curiosity, willing to wrestle with fresh meanings, gain new insights, even be transformed in some way. I value this, but I must admit I find it difficult to do in Unitarian Universalism because there are so many different stories to choose from. I sometimes find myself envious of Jewish and Christian colleagues who have a lectionary with set readings and familiar stories to return to and look at anew. Many UU congregations use monthly themes, like we do, to provide some focal point for our liberal religious musings. But even then, it can feel overwhelming because the themes are so broad and our sources are limitless. Sheila writes reflections every month on our theme. She knows what I'm talking about. Just this past month at UUSM, our services featured stories and teachings from Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, paganism, and Taoism. As a whole, UU ministers work hard to offer breadth, and Terry does too, given our embrace of pluralism. I love that about our tradition. I couldn't be here if we weren't open to a variety of sources. But it's also the case that what we gain in breadth, we often lose in depth. This is a challenge for us. In the foreword to a popular introduction to Unitarian Universalism titled A Chosen Faith, Robert Fulghum tells a story about a conversation that he has in a bookstore. Mr. Fulghum, is it true you're a minister? Yes. Where's your church? We're standing in it. But this is a bookstore and it's Friday. Yes, but you might also choose to see it as a cathedral of the human spirit, a storehouse consecrated to the full spectrum of human experience. Just about every idea we've ever had is sacred space.
Really? Just what kind of minister are you? Unitarian Universalist. Is Unitarian Universalism like a giant bookstore with easy access to the full spectrum?
Of human experience?
No. But we do sometimes think of ourselves that way, or at least we have. Fulgham's story is a few decades
Old now, but it remains a telling metaphor.
Any bookstore, no matter how large, is just a small
Sampling of the infinite variety of
human ideas,
stories and
expressions,
many interpreted and translated, losing and gaining much in the process.
the assumption that we have easy access
To all of that it's as
simple and non-relational
relational as lifting a book from a shelf has gotten
Unitarian Universalists
into a fair amount of trouble over the years.
in our practice of drawing from many sources,
Including the sacred stories of diverse cultures and traditions, UUs haven't always been attentive to the realities of privilege and power, the importance of context,
or the actual
people who have formed
formed and been formed by the sacred songs and stories of their traditions. Fortunately, there is a growing awareness of misappropriation among us,
and a slowly
growing,
cultural humility too.
but it's rough going sometimes. It's complicated, and it's not always clear where the lines are between different traditions.
And between drawing from and misappropriating.
There are lots of articles about it, you can look it up and read about it, but there's
No litmus test, no clear set of guidelines about
how to navigate
the boundaries of difference.
Diana Eck, scholar of religion and founder of Harvard's Pluralism Project, writes, religions are far more like rivers than like boundary, complex structures. Nourished by mountain springs,
They gather tributaries, flow in
full flood through the plains, divide into multiple branches, merge in confluence with other streams, and spread into vast deltas. Some eventually spend themselves and dry up, leaving behind the traces.
of an ancient riverbed.
Others become so extensive and complex.
They constitute an entire system.
It's important to remember then, Eck continues, that living religious traditions
Are in motion as each new generation makes that tradition its own, in its own time, and in its own
ways. Religions are not simply sets of
ideas or practices passed in a box from generation to generation, but living traditions of faith that must be appropriated anew.
Recently, as we've been discussing the possible replacement of the Jesus
Window, several people
have proposed a design that would include
symbols
symbols
of various religious traditions. Now, I don't think this is a proposal that's being really
offered because of the expense. I'm using it to make a point. I see the appeal of that design, but I don't think it would eliminate tensions. I also don't think it accurately represents who we are as Unitarian Universalists. Because where would you draw the line? Which symbols would you include? Which would you leave out? And why? It's the same conundrum the General Assembly of our National UU
Association sought to address by replacing the list of 6 sources in our former UUA covenant with a more general description of our inspirations. That vote
was just taken in June. If you don't know about the 6 sources, you can find them in our hymnal
on the same page with the 7 principles.
which were part of the Old Covenant. Here is the new description of our inspirations. As Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired
By sacred and secular understandings that help us live into our values.
We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which they were
Created and currently practiced.
These sources
and the diversity
which enriches our faith,
we are called
to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. No specific sources are included in this current statement, which the General Assembly did adopt in June, as I said, but respect for the histories, context, and cultures
in which they were created and practiced is included.
So understanding ourselves as a living tradition composed of untranquil
Streams doesn't excuse us from thinking carefully about how we engage stories and sources from other streams, and more importantly,
how we relate to the living people formed in and through those streams. Back to the Jesus window and the stories it tells. That window has lots of stories, doesn't it? I've known this community for 6 years. Haven't been here that long, but I've known you that long. And I know some of those stories, and there's probably a lot I don't know. We could make up titles for many of the stories. This is just for fun. I hope I don't offend anybody. Mr. Rosewarne's window would be kind of an intriguing one. He's the one whose name is up there because he donated the window. 2, how Jesus got white skin. 3, agony or ecstasy. 4, the year Jesus got a face tattoo. 5, the Christmas we hid Jesus behind a wreath. 6, the image we love to hate. 7, what are you doing up there? Or pluralism without Jesus, and other confounding facts about Unitarian Universalism. Or maybe, depending on what happens at the
congregational meeting in 2 weeks, the day we voted Jesus off the island. That was a
reference of me, but it was fun. And I'm sorry if I offended anybody, but there's truth there. It's just that you've been fighting about that window, it appears, it sounds from
what Terry and I have gathered for about 50 years now. And as
Reverend Terry has observed, it doesn't seem to be a fruitful fight. Plus, it's more welcoming to replace Jesus than to cover him. So I hope that you come to the congregational meeting
in 2 weeks to vote on a new design.
Beloveds, whatever you decide to do about the window, I hope we can do some healing of religious wounds. Many of us come here and come to Unitarian Universalism, me included, by the way, because we have had negative experiences with religions prior, other religions than Unitarian Universalism. And unless we tend to the wounds from those prior experiences, they continue to drive us often, drive our behaviors. And we may not be aware of it, but it comes out. It comes out in a lot of Unitarian Universalist contexts. Reverend Terry and I have observed a discomfort with and reactivity to Christianity in
Particular here, and that is not everybody, but it's enough people that we have observed
it repeatedly. We live in a Christian, it's understandable, I just want to say, it's understandable. We live in a Christian dominant culture, and many of us have experienced
direct or indirect harm by forms
of Christianity that sow bigotry,
shame, fear, and
exclusion. And now we are facing a truly frightening rise in white Christian nationalism across the country at the highest levels of power. Given our values, of course, we're going to resist destructive forms of Christianity. But let's not mistake them for Christianity as a whole. And let's not hold Christianity to a higher bar than we do other traditions either. All religious traditions can and have been used
to sow bigotry, violence, and exclusion.
And all religious traditions can have inspired powerful movements for freedom, justice, and compassion. That is true for Unitarian Universalism as well, both sides. Religion is a double-edged sword. so many different perspectives and opinions. But I wouldn't change it. Much as we might yearn for simplicity and
clarity, we UUs have chosen an orientation of openness to
and active participation
in the vast complexity and diversity of human expressions of meaning and purpose.
That doesn't mean we do it perfectly or even well, but it's a brave, beautiful, and challenging orientation. When I think about it as an orientation, I like to imagine us holding hands as we turn our minds and hearts toward complexity, toward diversity. How else can we do it except by holding hands? How else can we keep opening ourselves again and again as we promise to do in our
Covenantal tradition to the world in
all its awesome and terrible complexity? How can we possibly stay genuinely open to difference and uncertainty, to risk and change?
how could we
We do that if we aren't connected to one another in body and in spirit through the power of love. So in closing, I invite us to imagine ourselves holding hands. Close your eyes and do right. Holding the hands, connecting to all the other UUs across the country and around the world, forming one long human chain of hearts and minds, diverse in culture and belief, sharing an orientation of genuine openness and active participation in the great unfolding story of life. Just imagine.
And now I invite you to imagine joining hands with all the other religious liberals here in the United States and right here in San Mateo County too. Because it is more important now than ever that we not limit our pluralistic engagement to books. It is more important now than ever that we reconnect, that we connect and reconnect to the Jews, Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, Hindus, and all those from indigenous and earth-based traditions who know that climate change is real and it's happening now. That diversity and pluralism are our great strength, who know that no person is illegal, and that the way forward is not through fear, hatred, and division, but through courage, love, and connection. I hope you will participate in the multi-faith events that are happening on January 20th, Inauguration Day and Martin Luther King Day at the same time, and that together, grounded in our diverse understandings of the holy and of the world and our place in it, we will ensure that the transformative power of love continues to play a central role in our collective and unfolding story. May it be so, and amen.